So the Spanish princess draws to an end. This was the series finale. I thought it was just the season finale. I imagined that there would just be more because Henry and Catherine's story is so much longer than what we've seen. I know that they moved things along, they accelerated it, but still there's just so much more that happens after this point in time. I just figured that there would be more for them to tell. I think they had a lot more material, but for whatever reason, they decided to wrap it up. I don't know if they are maybe planning on doing another series with the story of Anne Boleyn. And I know that story has been told 1,000 times, so I assume that they weren't going to do it, but who knows? I mean, and if they do, I will be quite excited. I would love to continue to see these actors and actresses on the screen, but who knows? Anywho, it was a really good episode. It was a really good finale, if you will, and let's just jump right in. So it begins with where we left off last time. We know that Catherine was pregnant again and she lost the baby. And in the beginning of this episode, she's obviously told Henry that she lost the baby. And you see Mary, Princess Mary, standing outside the door, and she's upset because her parents are arguing and screaming. And Henry is screaming at Catherine, you know, saying that she lost another one of their children. And you know, you know that this is really the end of it all. He's fed up. I don't know how many pregnancies she's had at this point, but I think we've seen at least 4 or 5 that have ended in stillbirths or in deaths shortly after the child was born. And if you know the story, you know that she never does give him any more children other than Mary. So the writing was on the wall. He's fed up with her and he's done. So not only does he blame her for the death of these boys or the death of these children, but then, you know, to add injury to insult, he calls for his bastard, Henry Fitzroy, to be brought to him. So remember, he had a son with Bessie Blount. Bessie was Catherine's lady-in-waiting. He has a little boy with her who is a bastard, but Henry is indulging him because I guess he's feeling like, you know, this is the closest thing I have to a son. And there might be some of this in which he's trying to just kind of stick it to Catherine to make her feel worse because she's disappointed him in so many ways. So you see many instances where he shows favor to Henry Fitzroy over his daughter Mary. And that's what pretty much happens throughout this entire episode. And I think this is the first time you really get a sense that Mary sees it and she knows that her father doesn't love her or is, you know, she senses that something's wrong here. I think she senses that she's a disappointment and that she's not what he wanted. And it really becomes highlighted when he bestows these new titles on Henry Fitzroy in front of his daughter and in front of the entire court. So he's making a really broad, grand statement that he'd rather give titles and attention to a bastard son than to his royal-born true daughter. And although Henry is so mean to Catherine and, you know, he's blaming her unnecessarily, she still defends him. Right after they have their argument, he storms out of their rooms and he runs into Margaret Pole and he banishes her from court. He tells her that she's got to go. I think he's mad. Well, it's not even really sure why he's so mad at her. I think, you know, with Henry, there's so many things that are just, people are just collateral damage. Kind of like we saw last week with the Duke of Buckingham. Once he gets something in his head, he just kind of goes with it and there's really no logic to it. So I think the association between Margaret Pole and Catherine, Margaret is also the governess for Princess Mary. She is also the mother-in-law. Okay, no. Her daughter Ursula married the Duke of Buckingham's son, and the Duke of Buckingham was executed last week. So perhaps Henry's like just kind of cleaning shop and says, you know, if the Duke was executed for treason, then any and everybody who's associated with him has to go too. Although Margaret Pole is his aunt and she obviously has nothing to do with this, but you know, that's just kind of how Henry rolls. So he tells her that she's banished from court. She goes to Catherine, is like, you know, what's going on here? And Catherine tells her, do not malign the king. Don't talk bad about him. And, you know, we see a lot of misplaced anger with Catherine. She takes it out on Lina. She takes it out on everybody who's around her. And Margaret Pole is just another example. So she tells her, you know, don't talk bad about the king. And if he sends you to the tower, I'm not going to come save you. Critical mistake, because that conversation between the two of them is going to set the tone for what happens later, but I won't fast forward too much. We'll get to that. So Henry calls for his son to come. So we see Bessie Blount is back at court. She has her son with her. He's probably 5, maybe 6 years old now. She's all excited and hyped because, you know, her son is being acknowledged in some way. There's going to be an announcement. Nobody knows what the announcement is, but she knows that this is something good for her son, and then as a byproduct, good for her. Henry plans this big event. Did not tell Catherine about it, obviously. So when she gets herself all dressed up and she gets Mary dressed up and they walk into the court, people are looking at her like, what is she doing here? Because, you know, folks know what's going on. People won't say things to her out of respect for her and her role, but they see the writing on the wall. And those who are close to Henry probably already know what it is that he plans to do. But Catherine, you know, she's always just dignified. She always holds her head high. You know, she's always being the bigger person. And instead of avoiding it, she, you know, gets her and Mary all dolled up, and they walk into the hall to find out what the king has to announce. You get in there, and Henry Fitzroy is being presented to his father, and Henry is basically saying that he is going to bestow upon him all these titles. He's becoming the Duke of Somerset, I think the Duke of Richmond, and some other stuff. So he's basically just giving him all of these titles, and to indicate that he is the son of the king and he holds him in high regard. Funny part, that so the little boy, Henry Fitzroy, he's trying to speak to his father in Latin. And it's clear that he doesn't have a strong grasp of it. He stumbles, and Mary, little Princess Mary, who's probably about the same age as Fitzroy, she's educated, she's smart, so she knows her Latin very well. And she's watching this little boy stumble, and she's like, you know, it's just what kids do. Like, you know, she doesn't have the decorum or the etiquette to know not to say anything. So she, you know, she's looking at this little boy like, what is it that you're trying to say? Because you're not making any sense. And she corrects him, and it's a funny moment. Everybody sees it for what it is. It's obvious that Mary is intelligent and she's educated, but she's a girl. And that is just going to be the end all be all with Henry. So it's an awkward moment where little Henry Fitzroy gets upstaged by his half-sister. And Catherine, I have to say, she is just such a class act. You know, the fact that she's even there, the fact that she tries to, in a sense, defend a little boy, you know, or at least not bring light to the fact that his Latin isn't good, and that, you know, he should be slightly embarrassed by all the attention that's on him, and the fact that he doesn't know the language. And, you know, when Mary says to the boy, she's like, well, you said father twice. Do you have two fathers? And Catherine steps in and says, yes, he does. He has the father who's on the throne, and he has his father in heaven. So still, she is just being so above board and mature and handling this so well. And Henry doesn't deserve her. You know, she made her mistakes, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And I'm kind of on the fence about what I think about her decisions, why she did what she did, and how it all fell apart. But I'm wondering if, I don't know that I judge her for it. I don't know. We'll get to that. I'm kind of still working it out in my head. But Catherine is just, she's a good woman. You know, did she make a mistake? Certainly. Did she lie? Yes. But you know she loves him, and she's good to him, and she really wanted, and she dedicated her life to doing the right thing and being the queen and being a good queen for England. And it's just sad that something as, I don't want to say simple, something that nobody has control over, the fact of whether you have a boy or a girl, it stands in the way of their marriage, and of, you know, and really pretty much puts her in a really bad place where the later years of her life she spends in sadness because of how Henry treated her, and how Henry treated her daughter. So in this same scene, we see Mary, Henry's sister, have a conversation with Catherine, and she's talking about her sister Meg, who's up in Scotland, who has all these other issues with regard to her son and the regency. And Meg had been petitioning to Henry to support her in getting her marriage annulled. At first, Henry wasn't paying her any mind because he was mad at her because she had went ahead and got married against his wishes. She appealed to Catherine. Catherine turned a blind eye to her, turned her back on her and Catherine's motives were selfish. It wasn't so much that she didn't understand Meg's situation, but Catherine was looking at this through her own eyes. She knows that once the floodgates open and it's okay for marriages to get annulled, hers is going to be next. She knows Henry is increasingly disappointed with her, angry with her. He's already stepped out on her. He's already had a child outside the marriage. You know, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that the next step is to get rid of her. So she has to hold a hard line against annulment. And she uses the church as an excuse, saying, you know, according to the Pope, you know, annulment is against it's against the church, you know, it's against God's word, you know, you just kind of have to work it out. And she's speaking through her own lens because she wants her and Henry to just work it out. So she can't support it because then that will come back to bite her later. But Mary and she speak, and Mary tells her, you know, Henry has spoken to Margaret. He is now had a change of heart and he's supporting the annulment. And this is just, you know, foreshadowing of what's to come. It's just more evidence for Catherine that things are starting to fall apart for her and the end is near. We also see in this scene where Thomas Boleyn tells his daughter, Anne Boleyn, who would become Henry's next wife, to go and get in front of the king and to, you know, get his attention. So we see this is going to be like the next chapter in Henry's life where he is going to turn from Catherine towards Anne. And this is one of the first steps in which you see that folks in court are starting to manipulate Henry to get him to do what they want. And one of these first manipulations is to get his attention towards Anne so that the Boleyn family can be uplifted. We see Catherine pleading with Henry. She's walking down the hall with him and she's saying, you know, we can try again. I'm still healthy. I'm still young. We can do this. And it's just really sad to watch. You know, she's desperate. She's truly desperate at this point. And he's just not hearing her. You know, he's telling her that it's over. You know, we've tried. He brings up the fact that he thinks that their marriage is cursed because of Leviticus, you know, the quote that says, if a man is to marry his sister, he will be punished, and the punishment will be that they have no children. And because she was married to Arthur, he believes that she actually did have relations with him, although she denies it, and he believes now that his marriage is cursed because of that. And Catherine denies it, and they go back and forth, you know, but it's obvious that Henry has already checked out at this point. Interesting conversation is that Catherine says to Henry, you know, why is Mary not enough? You know, maybe it's our destiny to have a daughter who becomes the queen and she takes over the kingdom. Why is that so far-fetched? Like, maybe this is what our life is supposed to look like. Now, Henry can't wrap his mind around this because, you know, he's also coming from a precarious situation because of the way his father won the throne. And he feels it's so important to have an heir so that there is no more civil unrest in England, and that there aren't folks who then go and who rally against him because they don't think he's the true king. So for him having an heir, it's bigger than just the whole dynamics of men versus women. He's trying to secure his throne and trying to secure his reign over England, which I understand. But Catherine is coming from a place where her mother was queen of Spain. And I mean, her mother and her father ruled together, but her mother was a standalone queen. So she comes from a different stock, a very strong woman. And she knows that a woman can be queen and can run a kingdom, and it doesn't matter. She knows Mary is smart. She is wise. She has all the skills that she needs. She has the royal blood. So, you know, what she's saying makes sense, but Henry's just not here for it. And the irony of this is that it would be Henry's daughter, Elizabeth I, who would take over. You know, after he goes through all his wives and he has a couple of children and all this other stuff, when the dust settles, and after the dust settles, Elizabeth is going to take over, and she is going to be one of the longest reigning queens in English history. she will end up ruling longer than her father did. So the irony of this is that a woman will end up taking over and will be his heir. Of course, he doesn't know this at the time, but it's just really interesting that he's so dead set against it, to the point that he would set aside his first wife because he doesn't have a son. When it's all said and done, you're never really going to have a son, and it will be a daughter who will carry on your legacy. So knowing all of this, watching this scene was particularly painful, because all of this is almost for nothing. You know, it's a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, all for him not to get the end result he wants anyway. Sidebar, Lina and Oviedo, I think that's how you pronounce his name. Lina and Oviedo have conversations. They realize that things are looking really bad in England right now. For the last couple of episodes, we saw that there was all this unrest. There were riots in the streets. Their children are suffering because they are not English children. They are having issues. And Oviedo's like, yo, let's get out of here. Why are we staying in this country? There's nothing good is going to come out of this. Lina is very loyal to Catherine. You remember she came over with her from Spain. I don't know. She's her lady in waiting. She's her trusted advisor. She doesn't want to leave her, but I think she realizes that, yeah, things are looking bad. And, you know, I want my family to. And so she's kind of in a place where what's best for my family and where do my loyalties lie? And that's what her struggle is. They learn that they have an opportunity to leave because Rosa is still in England. She is going back to Spain with her family, and the boat has docked in England. So if they do want to leave, they do have an opportunity to go back to Spain and be back where they originally came from. So Lina's struggling with this because she doesn't want to leave Catherine, obviously, but I think she knows that it's what's probably best for her, especially since I believe she knows that Catherine's future here is looking really bleak. So it would be kind of silly to put your family through all of this to stay with Catherine when Catherine's future is just up in the air. So after Henry had banished Margaret Pole from court, he took it a step further, and he had the royal guards go to the estate of the Duke of Buckingham and basically confiscate all of their stuff, which was what happened. When you fall out of favor, the king has the right to take all of your property, and it becomes property of the state. So because because the Duke of Buckingham had been executed for treason, now he is, him and all of his heirs and all of his family are kind of collateral damage. So the royal guards go to the house and they go to take everything away. Margaret is pissed because, you know, she has suffered so much. She's sacrificed so much for the royal family, for the Tudors in particular. And now, through no fault of her own, her daughter and her son-in-law are now going to be stripped of all of their property and may end up living in poverty. And she's fed up. She's had it. So she heads over to England because she's like, you know what? I'm going to go and talk to Henry because I have some information. Now, this is going back to where Catherine had a misstep in the beginning of the episode, because when Margaret tried to talk to her, Catherine pushed her aside because she was upset about what happened with Henry, and she basically told Margaret, listen, you know, if you have to go to the tower, you have to go to the tower. I'm not going to do nothing for you. So Margaret doesn't feel like she has any loyalty to her anymore. You know, her family is suffering again, and this is the second time that her family is going to be put into destitute because of a falling out that she's had with the Tudors. And, you know, now it's bigger than her. She has a daughter. She has grandchildren. You know, Catherine has not been treating her well as of late. So she's like, you know what? I'm just going to tell what I know. So she goes to Henry and she tells him, you know, I was there. I know that Arthur and Catherine actually did have relations, and I've been holding on to this lie for all these years. And yeah, that's what I got for you. So now that I've given you some information, are you going to finally treat me right? Are you going to give me back my lands, and you're just going to kind of let me be in peace? And he agrees. Obviously, this is terrible for Catherine. You know, Henry takes this, Henry finds Catherine out in the garden. He tells her, you know, let's go hunting. But before he does that, he makes another statement. I mean, he's been taking shots at her like pretty much this whole season. But in the beginning of this episode, it was by giving all of these honors to Henry Fitzroy and by disregarding his daughter. Then he goes and And he makes Mary and Anne Boleyn Catherine's ladies in waiting. You know, this is an opportunity for him to get closer to Anne Boleyn, because you remember the father, Thomas Boleyn, had tried to connect the two of them so that he could gain some favor from the king. And, you know, Catherine sees what this is. She knows that, you know, the lady in waiting, if you appoint somebody to the woman's court, that now he has access to her, and it's a slap in the face, but he does it. So now she has that. Then he says, let's go hunting. They go out hunting. It's just the two of them. She starts to pick up that something is awry here. You know, his mood is different. He seems angry. And he confronts her. He tells her, you know, Margaret Pole told me that you lied to me. And she denies it. And they go back and forth. And he's like roughing her up and screaming at her, calling her all kinds of names. And then she just confesses. And he brings up the verse from Leviticus about how they are going to be damned because she lied. She brings up a scripture from, I want to say, Deuteronomy, and saying that, you know, it's okay for a man to take his brother's wife, but, you know, it's too late for all of that. And, you know, it's very clear at this point in time that he is done with her. And she begs and she pleads. And at one point, they even hear some noise in the background because it's just the two of them out there. And she's wondering, has he even sent somebody out there to kill her? Like, that's how bad it's gotten that she thinks that her life actually might be in jeopardy. But he just leaves. He calls for his horses and he leaves her there. Catherine makes her way back to the palace. She sees Maggie. She says, you know, I know what you did. And Maggie's like, hey, you know, I did what I had to do. And, you know, you told me I was on my own, so I'm on my own. It is what it is. So it's very clear where the two of them stand with each other. Catherine is devastated. She's in tears. Her world is falling apart around her. She's nervous. She's scared for her daughter. She has a conversation with Lina in which Lina shares with her that she's thinking about leaving England. Catherine gives her blessing, realizing there's really no point for her to stay anymore. Catherine reaches out to Meg. She writes her a letter and asks that, you know, okay, since you and your brother are now in a good place, can you speak to him on my behalf? And even if it's not for me, do it for Mary. But Meg is not hearing her because when Meg was reaching out to Catherine, Catherine shut her down. So now this is Meg's opportunity to return the favor. So she just tosses her letter in the fire. So Catherine is out here on her own. She's on an island. You know, her confidant has betrayed her. You know, Henry has made some really public statements about where he stands for her. He's all but told her that he's done with her. Her trusted advisor is going to be leaving and going back to the Ottoman Empire. You know, her daughter sees it for what it is. It's just, she's in a really, really, really bad place. We see her have a nightmare, and she wakes up and she catches Henry sneaking out at night, going out to see who appears to be Anne Boleyn. And we see that Anne is out there and she's half naked and she's teasing him. And Catherine sees all this. She picks up a crossbow and she gets them in her crosshairs. And for a second, she even considers killing him. But she pulls herself together and realizes that she's just gone too far. You know, that she's losing herself and that it's over. Catherine starts to get her affairs in order. She's writing a letter to her daughter Mary and telling her that, you know, she is smart, she's wise, she is the future of England, and just, you know, trying to fortify her because she knows that this is going to be it's hard for Catherine to deal with, but, you know, Mary is still a little girl, so she's trying to fortify her daughter. She sees everything that's going on. Henry has Anne Boleyn sitting by his side, and they are just, you know, playing music together and dancing and singing and drinking wine and having all these moments. She sees that Margaret is now taking on the role almost as like a governess to Henry Fitzroy, taking on the role that she used to play for Mary, taking on the role that she used to have for Mary. It's clear that her allegiance has shifted. Everything is apparent now. And Catherine makes a decision to leave. She tells Henry, you know, I love you. I've always loved you. I pity you. And I'm just going to go because this is just not working. And I know that that's what you want. She does say, though, that she is not going to walk away from the marriage because she is his true queen. She runs into Anne Boleyn at one point and tells Anne, hey, listen, you know, you might have him now and you might be sleeping in my bed, but you'll never be the queen. This is where the story is different than what happens in real life. And this could be because they wanted to end this series with only 2 seasons, because we know that Catherine does not leave willingly. There is all of this fighting between them all. You know, Henry is trying to divorce her. She doesn't want to leave. She petitions to the Pope and to her nephew, the Holy Roman Emperor. And basically there's all this infighting that goes on around Rome, where the Pope is saying, no, I'm not going to allow this annulment. She's fighting. He's trying to get her to leave. He's now with Anne Boleyn at this point. She's pissed because she's waiting for Catherine to leave. She wants her out of the palace. And there's so much more that happens. So Catherine, essentially, she does not leave willingly. And eventually she has to pretty much be banished from court, and she gets sent away to live out the rest of her life at some castle. It goes so far as that Henry even prevents her from seeing Mary at one point. He prevents them from seeing each other because neither of them will agree that Catherine is no longer his lawful wife, and they will not accept that Anne Boleyn is the new queen of England. And it's just so much more of this to unpack, but she doesn't leave willingly. So in this one, we see her taking the higher ground, which was a nice way to end the series. You know, you see her leaving with some dignity, and it just kind of captures who she's been through this entire time. So it makes sense from a storytelling point of view, even though it's not historically correct. And we see her and Mary leaving the palace. You know, I don't know where she's going. She says she's going to go live outside of she's leaving Westminster. She's going to go live quietly someplace else, and she's taking her daughter with her. And for her, this was just a sense of peace. It was just time. And in real life, that's probably what she should have done, because it didn't end well for her anyway. And had she left willingly, he may not have gone to the extent that he did. And Anne Boleyn's fall from grace might have happened sooner. You know, I think it's easy to make somebody a villain when you have somebody else sitting in the cut waiting for you. But had Catherine just pulled herself out, he would have probably seen sooner who Anne really was. And it may not have gotten as far as it did, where she may not have had to live in exile and die the way that she did. But, you know, shoulda, woulda, coulda. She did the best she could with what she had, and it was really good. I'm going to miss this series. I thought this was just really, really well done. The acting was excellent. The storytelling was good. All of the subplots, you know, even though it didn't, in historical fiction doesn't always follow the line of the true story, but it followed pretty closely, and it was quite fascinating. And if you're somebody who doesn't know the full story and hasn't followed it and hasn't read books and all this other stuff, it gives you enough information to kind of get a sense of what happened and how everything played out. One other thing I think that they did really well was the actor who played Henry. We saw his evolution, and we saw him evolve from this young, playful boy who was never meant to be king, and then how he takes on the responsibility and he becomes a man. He steps into his father's shoes, and then we see him start to fall apart, and we see the unraveling of him and all the influence, the external influence he had from other people, and how that impacted not only his relationship with Catherine, but his mental well-being. And even up until the very end, there are so many moments where he does horrible things to Catherine. He speaks to her poorly, and you still see in his eye he feels bad about it. You know, he's a layered character. It's not just a black and white thing where he just mistreats her and feels no remorse. You can sense it. There was even the scene after he announced that he was going to give all these titles to his son. And Catherine is looking at him, and she's devastated, and you can see it, but she's keeping her chin up, and he looks at her, and you can tell he feels bad. even at the end when she said he was leaving, you almost saw a hesitation where it's like he didn't really want her to leave, even though he knew that that was probably what was best. So I think he played it really well. I don't know if it's the writing or if it's the actor or if it's a combination of both, but it just shows you how complex he was as a man, and that he struggled with his decisions, and he wasn't just this tyrant, or at least not at this point. He wasn't that tyrant, and he was a man who had some inner turmoil, and he was dealing with it, and we got to see all of that play out. So it's over, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. Wonderful job. I do hope that they move forward and they do another series. And I don't know if it's going to be about Anne, or if maybe they'll focus on Mary or do something else. But I mean, this is just, it's too good to just let go. So I enjoyed this. I really enjoyed reviewing these on a weekly basis. And I would love to hear your comments. What do you think? Oh, this was one thing. This is where I was saying in the beginning where I was a little conflicted. So we know that Catherine lied. She did lie. She told him that she was a maid and she and Arthur had never consummated their marriage. And that she told that lie so that Henry would marry her, so that she would become Queen of England. And she was a good queen. She was a great queen. The people loved her. She did a lot for them. She sacrificed for them. She had pure intentions. So I wonder if I feel bad for her. I'm not sure, because she lied, she misled him. So is that enough of a crime to warrant her demise? Or was it reasonable given how she was raised and the fact that she was brought up to believe that it was her destiny to become the Queen of England? And she did a good job at being queen. So it's one of those things, was like, you know, did the ends justify the means? And I'm not sure what I feel about that. She's a sympathetic character. I hate that it ended up that way for her. But then I could see how some people would say, well, you know what? She brought it on herself by lying and being manipulative. So I don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think she's been a character. She's a sympathetic character, and especially when we compare her to Henry, especially to compare her to Anne Boleyn and other wives, you always feel like, I think the consensus is that she was a good woman and the people liked her and they hated what happened to her. And in real life, I don't know if she lied and if she did really have relations with Arthur. But, you know, is that a big enough crime for her life to end the way it did? I don't know. Just something to think about. And I love shows like this, things that, you know, this was a story from the 1500s, but here we are in 2020 still contemplating all this and thinking it through. So it's, which is just another reason why I love the Tudor story and the Tudor dynasty and all of this, because it's quite fascinating. So that's all I have. And I would love to hear your feedback and your comments. And thank you for taking this journey with me and watching this. And hopefully we can reconvene when Starz comes out with another series that continues the story of this fascinating dynasty. Do not forget to like and subscribe.